Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our session. Can everyone hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat. Great. Thank you. No echo. Perfect. Great. So we have a jam-packed session, so I'm just going to get right started. Hi, everyone. This is towards an equitable post-COVID food supply chain session. I hope everyone had a chance to stretch and had something to eat. Your bellies are full and you're ready to dive into this session. My name is Catherine Nguyen. I'm an Assistant Vice President at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. I'm joined here with my colleagues Louise Young, who is the Director of Resiliency at New York City Department of Transportation, and Neil Padicone, who is the Director of Manufacturing and Industrial Innovation Council at the New York City Small Business Services. We have been working together as part of the Food Czar Task Force, and we put together the session today, and we've invited a number of guests to speak with you guys to hear about how the food supply chain has been impacted by COVID. So first off, we'll be hearing from Dolores Bustamante, who is a former farm worker representing the Rural Migrant Ministry, who'll be, and then we have Ross Tuttle, who is the senior producer from Brick TV, who will be representing processing as part of the food supply chain. We have Richard Kemp. Wave hi, Richard. He is the director at Driscoll Foods, representing distribution. We have Francisco Marte, who is the president of the Bodega Association of New York, representing retail. And then finally, we'll have closing remarks from Senator Jessica Ramos. We'll start with a presentation with Louise and Neil, and then we'll follow up with some interviews with all of the guest panelists, and then ending with a Q&A session. So with that, I'll pass it over to Louise.
Hi, everyone. I'm Louise. I go by she, hers. Neil, Catherine, and I came to work together as part of the Food Czar team, along with those in our audience, which is a new task force created by the city at the start of the COVID crisis. Our mission was twofold. First, creating programs to feed New Yorkers, including the free grab-and-go sites in public schools and food delivered by taxi drivers. And second, to secure the food supply chain, which entailed implementing rapid response actions to ensure that food distribution was not disrupted. Our team was cross-disciplinary, and it pulled from staff from across 15 different agencies that for the first time centralized food policy, feeding programs, and industry issues all under one roof. I'll provide a brief overview of some of the impacts that we saw on the city side of COVID-19 on the food sector, but the main goal is to really hear directly from our speakers who work in different parts of the food supply chain. So when we talk about the food supply chain, what we mean is the entire journey that food takes to get to our plates, and most importantly, the people involved in each step of the way. At the beginning, there's the production, which includes the farmers and fishermen who raise crops or livestock, and who owns or has access to the underlying land. Processing entails a whole host of activities, including freezing, canning, preserving, and butchering to prepare the foods, which then move to distribution, where truck drivers and warehouse workers help to transport and store the food until it gets to the next stage, either restaurants or grocery stores or food pantries, where we as eaters get our food. Though the restaurant and retail supply chains have a lot of common elements, as you can see in these diagrams, their suppliers are actually often pretty distinct in practice, and that's what made COVID disruption so hard, because many people supplying the restaurant side of things were not able to pivot very quickly to the retail market after the sudden closure of restaurants nationwide. We saw four main types of disruptions during the pandemic. And the first one was about the disruptions in the production of specific kinds of food commodities. Producers had a hard time turning wholesale products into retail-ready amounts due to the lack of packaging, processing capabilities, and regulation barriers. Take the eggs, for example, shown on the photo to the right. They're in restaurant-sized crates, and although you would think that they're a pretty simple item to resell, restaurant-bound eggs actually have different health and safety regulatory requirements, as well as carton sizes, than what we see at the supermarket. So many farmers suddenly found themselves with no place to sell their products, causing a lot of perishable foods to rot during the early days of the pandemic, which was especially painful as hunger and food security were on the rise. Food manufacturers streamlined the diversity of products that they produced, prioritizing bestsellers like Coca-Cola or chicken noodle soup, and pausing the production of less popular items, think Dr. Pepper or split pea soup. And in the agricultural sector, the main issue was really that many farmers planted less crops in the spring because they weren't sure whether seasonal workers would be able to get visas in time for fall harvest due to federal immigration policies. On the retail side, groceries became expensive. In April of this year, we saw the largest one-month increase in 46 years of grocery prices due to the increased cost of production. And grocery affordability has only been exacerbated by unemployment rates that have also risen. At the same time, online grocery sales have gone through the roof as people quarantined at home. Delivery slots for Fresh Direct and Amazon sold out in minutes, and Instacart reported a 300 sales over last year. Supermarkets had a really hard time keeping up with all of these changes as panic buying caused shortages of sanitizer and toilet paper, and new eating habits doubled the demand for flour, meal kits, and fake meat, whose demand actually now outpaces the growth of animal-based meat. Bodegas, interestingly, responded more flexibly to these consumer changes because they can restock as needed at like Costco, but even larger bulk sizes, whereas supermarkets had more rigid distribution schedules and couldn't respond as needed. Overall, businesses struggled to keep up with changing city, state, and federal directives that were constantly being revised as officials reacted to new information about COVID, and rules were often issued without warning and inconsistently enforced. I think it'll be a lasting challenge in the years to come to ensure that healthy and fresh food remains affordable to all people, while also balancing the need to pay for the true cost of labor and environmental impacts that go into food production. On the freight side, 90% of the freight in New York comes through truck, and over just 4 bridges, and half of the freight comes through just 4 bridges and tunnels. During the pandemic, cross-country and last-mile trips were actually faster because there was less congestion, but many truck drivers had challenges finding available public bathrooms because many stores and rest areas were closed or had reduced hours. On the rail side, the primary refrigerated rail service that brings fresh food into New York permanently closed, which means more goods are now coming by truck, which has air quality implications, especially in environmental justice areas. And although freight was largely undisrupted, it remains pretty vulnerable to other future emergencies that cause physical damages like hurricanes, since half of our freight comes to the city through just these 4 bridges and tunnels. These lessons raise a lot of long-term questions about how we can make the freight sector more resilient and low carbon in the future as people are demanding increasingly fast delivery of food and groceries. And last but not least were disruptions related to the health of food workers. And I'll turn it to Neil to talk a little bit more about that. Neil, I think you might need to unmute yourself. You're on mute.
Thanks for catching that. So yeah, as Liz was mentioning, in many ways, most of the supply chain disruptions that she described were fundamentally really labor and workforce disruptions. Workforce health was the most vulnerable part of every supply chain. Grocery stores in New York City experienced huge absentee rates of over 30% due to COVID infections or fears of it. Many markets closed down temporarily, especially in the city's Chinatowns, which reduced local community access to food. There was one major distribution point that supplies nearly half of the city's food that was at risk of shutting down because of a lack of PPE. And you may have heard a lot about the meat processing industry, where the top 4 companies control nearly 40% of the market share, and their facilities have notoriously close quarters and poor labor practices. So when COVID rates spiked in those facilities, meat prices rose and the types of available cuts shrank. In the Wendy's restaurants in the city alone, 30% of them ran out of beef. But all this said, really the primary reason that the food supply chain adapted and was able to remain as resilient as it did has been its people. It's been the labor, the workforce, the talent. And even though most of the supply chain is often kept tucked away from most of our eyes, sometimes intentionally. It's been this work that has kept so many of us fed. So for the rest of this session, we're going to be centering the voices of those workers and those people that keep things running, and to share their firsthand experiences of working in the sector and of their experiences working in the sector during COVID with you. Our first speaker, Dolores Bustamante, unfortunately couldn't take time off of work to join us live. So we're going to share this interview that we recorded with her a few weeks ago about her work in the food production and farming sector.
Ok, mi nombre es Dolores Bustamante, soy madre soltera de 3 hijas. La última está estudiando 3er año de colegio. Soy de México. Hace más de 10 años que trabajo en la agricultura. Algo que me encanta, ¿verdad? Ahora mismo estoy trabajando en un rancho de manzanas. Cuando llegué a este país, que ya tiene más de 17 años que llegué a este país, llegué al estado de New Jersey, donde trabajaba en fábricas. Era muy caro. Decidí aventurar, ir a Florida sin conocer, porque anteriormente yo no había trabajado en la agricultura. Fue muy difícil y me lastimé mucho las manos. La cara se me quemó horrible pues sí, fue muy difícil. Pero otra de las cosas era de que el trabajo se termina, son temporadas solamente. Por ejemplo, en mayo, allá está la temporada en Florida, está la temporada de tomate, sandía y naranja. Se termina en junio. Y yo me venía a Georgia al tomate, eran 2 meses, me iba a North Carolina o Sur Carolina a la sandía, eran 2 meses, me iba a Maryland, eran otros 2 meses, regresábamos a Sur Carolina, 2 meses y regresaba a Florida. Y a mi hija era pequeña y la tenía que estar cambiando constantemente de escuelas. Esto era muy difícil para ella y creo que también para mí. Esto era cada año hasta que en el 2009 me invitaron a venir al estado de Nueva York a la manzana, porque es la temporada. Pues me quedé. Igual fue muy difícil al principio porque no sabe uno qué necesita uno, qué vestimenta, qué zapatos necesita uno para estar trabajando fuera en el frío, ya que en tiempo de invierno pues me quedo a podar árboles. Trabajo afuera, no tenía la ropa adecuada los primeros años, entonces fue muy difícil también, pero poco a poco fui aprendiendo y ahora pues ya tengo todo lo necesario. Como estos días ha estado lloviendo, si no podemos ir, no vamos. La manzana también tiene su tiempo y si no la corta uno en su tiempo, se pasa y ya no sirve. Entonces, cuando urge que se pisque, tenemos que ir aunque esté lloviendo poquito. Lo piscamos así. Entonces, ahora mismo, si no queremos ir, si está lloviendo, no vamos. Pero trabajo tenemos todo el año. Al menos en el rancho que estamos, porque no nos afectó esto de COVID, ¿verdad? De ir a ponchar la tarjeta, teníamos que siempre poner cómo nos sentíamos. Si teníamos fiebre, si sentíamos algún síntoma, no sé, diferente, era lo único. Pero cuando llegan los visados, entonces ahí sí se pone atención a todos. Anteriormente llegaban y tal vez por más 3, 4 días se ponían a trabajar. En esta ocasión no, ellos llegaron y no podían salir a ningún lado. no podían tener contacto con nadie. Eso es también muy desesperante para ellos, ya que el camino es largo de donde vienen y luego el estar encerrados es más difícil. Estuvieron arreglando casas para mandar a los que tenían síntomas, a los que salieran positivos, a separar a cada gente como se sintiera. Entonces, pues todavía más restricciones hacia ellos había. No los podían llevar a las tiendas grandes. De hecho, hasta la fecha no los pueden llevar al banco. En ese caso les están dando a firmar su cheque y ellos van y se los cambian. Sí, con ellos sí cambiaron muchas cosas. Un día de descanso, cosa que no teníamos, al menos en el rancho donde estábamos. Esta temporada no nos pusieron a trabajar los domingos. Me gustaría que se arreglara eso del pago de horas extras, ya que el trabajo también es muy duro, el de la agricultura.
In 2019, the Farm Workers Fair Labor Practices Act finally brought New Deal-era protections to New York State farm workers. Among other wins, the law required a day off every week and that farms pay overtime rates of 1.5 times the normal hourly wage for any work over 60 hours per week. But some farms have gotten around that requirement by having workers work 70 hours one week, 50 hours another week, and just paying at the rate of 60 hours per week. Other farms work their staffs harder to get 80 hours of work done in 60 so that they don't have to pay any overtime. Still, other farms cap work time at 60 hours a week. Workers that had been used to working and getting paid at flat rates for 80 hours see this change as a pay cut.
Después de 1 o 2 años que estaba yo aquí, empecé a involucrarme en diferentes cosas. Una de ellas fue en clases de inglés que me invitaron el Ministerio Rural. En el 2014 yo fui parada por un policía y me paró, llamó a migración, me llevaron, me iban a llevar a Pensilvania, a la cárcel, pero afortunadamente, como ya conocía muchas organizaciones, me ayudaron a no llegar a la cárcel de Pensilvania, me soltaron. Me vinieron a dejar a Batavia, me recogieron y me vinieron a dejar a mi casa. Y entonces ahí me involucré más con ellos y con más organizaciones, ya que me di cuenta que estar aliada y estar en contacto con organizaciones, pues ayuda mucho. Si yo no hubiera estado con estas personas y estas organizaciones, no sé dónde estuviera yo. Entonces, sí que voltearan un poco hacia atrás, no nada más de donde está el mostrador, donde está la fruta, donde está la comida, donde está todo esto. Ahí nada más no está la comida, hay más cosas atrás de todo eso, ¿verdad? Entonces, que investigaran un poquito más de todo, desde dónde viene todo eso, porque, como ya digo, yo creo que todos somos importantes, agricultores y cualquier trabajo que sea es importante, entonces sí que se nos valorara un poco más, y ya que pues nosotros, como digo, no tenemos pues los mismos beneficios que tienen los demás.
Thanks, Neil. So now I will be moving on to the processing aspect of the food supply chain. I'm going to share with you all a quick video clip. 1 second.
This was early April, and soon there were other stories of trouble at factory farms. Reports from the New York Times of a single chicken factory smashing 750,000 unhatched eggs a week, large hog farmers exterminating hundreds of thousands of pigs, and farmers elsewhere plowing fruits and vegetables back into the earth. All this while the country was growing anxious about finding and shopping for food. The pandemic hasn't been kind to factory farms with their rigid supply chains. But I began to wonder about local farms, ones like Ronnybrook in the Hudson Valley, that supply the city farmers markets, farm-to-table restaurants, soup kitchens, and food co-ops. How are they doing during the pandemic? And as food security questions abound, where do they fit in the equation of how we get fed?
Okay, so he says
Okay, I'd like to invite Ross from Brick TV to unmute yourself, and please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
hi there. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And yeah, so I'm a documentary producer currently working at Brick TV in downtown Brooklyn, and was interested over the course of the late spring and summer looking into food supply issues after speaking to a lot of my friends for a Brick podcast called Brooklyn USA about the challenges that local restaurants that received food from the surrounding rural areas, or the struggles they were going through. I was curious about the farms that had been supplying them. So I made a short documentary on the subject, a piece of which you just saw.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you thought going into your research project and a little bit more about what you've learned?
Sure. So my assumption, and this may have been a bit naive, was that because the restaurants were struggling and so the way that they distributed their food, the farms, I thought they'd be struggling as well, the local farms. And these were some farm-to-table restaurants in and around Brooklyn that obviously, had to shut down. And so I thought as these farms lost customers that they were going to be undergoing a lot of the same struggles. What I found when I looked at some of the local farms and smaller local farms, particularly in the Hudson Valley, that actually they were doing quite okay. There, of course, people still had to eat. And the demand was still there. It was just a matter of, okay, how do we get this food to people who are no longer getting it at restaurants? So many of the farms that I went to and explored, two of which appear in the documentary, they started to figure out ways to turn their business around and go a little bit more direct to consumer. Some of them already had direct to consumer relationships where they had small farm stores. They were working with distributors who would kind of aggregate a lot of the food from local farms and then distribute it. And some of them were bringing it to restaurants, but then they turned around and started delivering it, doing home delivery, where they had kind of a small footprint doing that already. Some of it, then it ballooned during the pandemic. And then farmers markets, when they started getting up and running again, they were still distributing at the farmers markets. And so they started to kind of band together and find out whoever had a farm store where they could bring their food. And the farm stores really blossomed and became places where, it was no longer a select few items that you would get, but it was items from other farms in the region where they would be getting flour from one farm, vegetables from another, meat products from yet another farm. And so it was a positive story. I mean, it was a small slice of the picture, and this was certainly centralized to the Hudson Valley and people who had access to it in the Hudson Valley. It was a different picture about getting that food into the city, and some of those farms were still delivering food to the city, whether it be to some of the food pantries or to CSAs, once the CSAs started getting up and running as well, community supported agriculture.
Hey, Ross, do you have any parting thoughts before we move on to the next panelist?
I mean, yeah, one thing was interesting to me, and I think Louise touched on this a little bit. I mean, and also Neil, there was a lot of consolidation in the 90s and early 2000s where you had processors that you used to have small kind of mom and pop processors and butcher shops and slaughterhouses. And there was a consolidation of those. And so a lot of those went out of business. I had a friend who runs a farm in Connecticut. And she said, without a butcher, I'm basically a zookeeper. And so these processors, these animal farms that needed to get their product to market need that intermediary step. And when a lot of those places just went away and then got shut down because of COVID, because of the close proximity of workers, because of the safety measures that are in place in some of these larger facilities, it was really a tragedy. Fortunately, for a lot of the people that I saw upstate, they were working with local processors that have survived, that have weathered the consolidation, and were able to continue to get their food out. So when there was pork and beef shortages elsewhere, they were still able to keep up with supply.
Thank you, Ross, for sharing those insights with us and what you learned from your interviews with the many processors and farmers upstate that you reached out to. Now I'd like to invite Richard Kemp to unmute himself. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Catherine and team. How are you all?
Hi, good, thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Can you please introduce yourself to everyone in the session and let them know what you do?
Sure, be happy to. And thank you very much for having me. I feel this is a great platform for us all to talk about what's going on and go through some different ideas with one another during this challenging time. So my name is Richard Kemp. First and foremost, I'm a husband and a father to 2 young boys. I live in Manalapan, New Jersey, and I've built a 22-year career within the food service distribution field, working for 3 different companies. First, initially, a smaller mom and pop frozen food distributor out of Jersey City, New Jersey. And then I worked for 17 years at a major corporate food service distributor called Performance Food Service out of Elizabeth, New Jersey. And for the past 2 years, I've been here at Driscoll Foods as their director of multi-unit accounts and bid accounts. Bid accounts meaning K through 12 schools, healthcare facilities, Meals on Wheels organizations, that type of business. So that's led me to meet Catherine by partnering with the city for the Food Reserve program.
Richard, can you talk to us a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted your work?
Sure. So there's 2 sides to where I'm at now here at Driscoll Foods. There's the street sales side, which is street accounts. And what does that mean? That means restaurants, bars and pubs. There is the other side of the business, which is more Meals on Wheels organizations, healthcare, colleges and universities. We also have a whole meal production facility here at Driscoll Foods, which is very different from many other food service distributors, where we assemble and produce ambient meals, whether it be breakfast kits or lunch programs, whatever it may be, for primarily urban school environments here in New Jersey, some in New York as well. So there's really 2 sides of it. And, luckily we've had that opportunity to pivot and focus on the latter as we see the restaurants having issues and challenges with being able to stay open, keep open, the rules that have been put against them.
How has COVID-19 kind of impacted the operations of Driscoll Foods?
So before COVID, we were a thriving 150 trucks, 75 pickers, 580 employee organization, okay? And post-COVID, due to extreme decrease in our volume in our business, we've had to pivot and adjust to what that's done to us. So unfortunately, we had to, like many companies have, we had to let some people go. We had to look at our inventory. We had to look at our transportation. We had to look at the type of partners we had. We had to look at our AR. We had to look at all of these different facets of our business and tighten things up. We were already a very tight run organization, but no one could be prepared for what happened to us in March. And so Tim Driscoll, who's the owner of this company, really sat down with each of the different department heads and went through a process of skinnying up things in order to keep us afloat and make sure that we come out of this different and better than we were before this. So unfortunately, some tough decisions need to be made as far as some personnel, like many companies. But at the same time, there was an opportunity to look at a whole different sector of the business that maybe we're in somewhat, maybe we weren't in that much, but there was an opportunity to get a lot more involved in that. So whereas before we were doing some business for ready-made meals and food banks and soup kitchens, and it may have been on a minimal scale, that's really exploded due to all this coming on now.
Can you describe some of the safety precautions that Driscoll has kind of undergone in light of COVID?
So here's something we're proud of. Driscoll overall, for many years now, has had a whole protocol as far as safety, cleanliness, all of that. You know, we have a USDA inspector here on site at all times. So we were already doing a lot of these things that maybe some other organizations or other companies weren't doing as pronounced as we were. So that's a good thing that we were already doing that. And we really had to take it to another level, you know, with wearing masks and temperature checks and social distancing. For example, my department, I have 5 individuals in my department, and, you know, we're all very kind of close together here in this office in Clifton, New Jersey here. And we had to spread them apart, move their desks, you know, put them in different areas, stagger some times that they came in or not. And this is when we all came back to work in June 15th, we all came back to the office here. So there's some people who work from home a couple days a week. I work from home myself 2 days a week. So there's a lot of different things that we've done. And we also have a whole protocol that I've actually submitted to Catherine and her team to go through, you know, what happens if there's a case of COVID within our warehouse, within our offices, anywhere on our grounds, and how that's handled. So we have a VP of Operations and Trans that is extremely involved in that. And just as an employee here and see what's going on every day to day, I think we're doing a really tight job at it.
Richard, so last question, is there any big takeaways that COVID has taught you that you'll carry on in your work moving forward?
Sure. So there's 2 things I want to point out. I think it's really, no matter what business you're in, I think it's important to diversify. That sounds pretty straightforward and simple to most people, but when you're in the thick of things and you're used to going after the same types of accounts, you're used to servicing the same type of accounts, you're used to partnering with agreements with the same type of accounts, you don't necessarily think, well, maybe I should look outside the box. Maybe I should say, you know, let's do a senior center. Instead of just doing a white tablecloth restaurant, for example. There's so many different types of accounts, colleges and universities, all of that. I think it's important to be diversified in your mix, heavily diversified, because you just never know what can happen. You don't know what can happen to you internally at the company or external forces, obviously, you know, such as this pandemic as well. The other thing I've learned that is very important is when planning your business out, it's always important to think 3 to 5 months ahead of schedule. Not always everybody does that. And thinking that 3 to 5 months out, not just with the type of accounts you're going to prospect, but also the inventory that you have, how long the inventory is here on frozen items, not produce or something like that, but produce items or dry items, and really keeping a tight ship when it comes to the inventory and how many turns are happening on a weekly basis. Inventory turns or turns of inventory through in our warehouse on a select item on a daily or weekly, monthly basis, and have a clear understanding of all of that as well. So those are some takeaways that are really important, that aren't just important to say, but you have to act on them.
Richard, thanks for joining us and sharing your insights with us today. So now I'll pass it over to Neil to go into the next panelist.
Sure. So we've heard from folks speaking about the production, processing, and distribution ends. And now we're going to hear from Francisco Marte to talk about one really important side of the retail end of things in New York City, bodegas. Similarly, Francisco couldn't join us live at this time from his space, so we are going to play you a recorded interview that we did earlier this week with Francisco.
My name is Francisco Marte. I'm from Bodegas and Small Business Association. I'm a bodega owner as well. When I came here first to the United States, I was 18 years old. Somebody offered me the opportunity to have my own store. I was very lucky because at that time they trust me, and I went pay little by little. That's how all of the bodegas we used to get the store. We don't have the money together like to pay $200,000 or $300,000, $400,000 for a grocery store. I spent a couple of years working without one day off. So we did help a lot to the recovery of the Bronx. And that's how I started until, now I still keep being a bodeguero. And what I define myself is as bodegueros. I'm a bodeguero, 100%. Was like coming early here to the store at 6 o'clock in the morning, deal with people, with my customer, going out to buy stuff for the store because we have a close relation with our customer. So it's good, like you're gonna see a bodeguero shaking or giving a hug or a kiss to a customer. That's something normal because we made that type of relation. We are part of the community. So that was my normal day. I come in, I work here, I go outside to buy the stuff that I need to stock the store. Come back, then the afternoon I go to my house. 2 more people they comes in the afternoon. So we work on here 5 total in the store. We already know like what is the products that they move the most. So we be having like a little bit of most of the stuff, or like everything. And then we know how we buy by quantity, what kind of products, because that sell more. Try to restock the product that go more quick. The other one, we just buy a little bit to have it there. So the customer doesn't go to another place to get it. Mostly we go to Jetro, Jetro Cash and Carry. And some other market, they are in House Point. Some we also buy from Crasdale. It's a big company too that they do the most with the supermarket, but they also work with us. But the bodegas, we almost go to Jetro Cash and Carry. I have my own bank to go get it. Some store they don't have it, or sometimes when you don't have it, it's people that they work. They are outside making delivery, so they provide you the delivery. So, but I prefer to have my own because that's to save expenses. So when they charge you $100, $150 to bring you there, so you can save that if you have your own vehicle. Like every other day or twice a week, all of the paints, if we bought what we need, so we don't need to go every day. Some other stuff, we call it, vendedores, the route guy. So they pass by. If we need something, we buy. Obviously, it's a little more expensive. So that's why they pass by. If we need something, they say, okay, let me get it. So I pay a little bit more, but I don't have to go there. That was a big change because first, we had to separate from the people. That was very tough for us because we used to have a very warm relation with our customer. So then when the COVID came, it was everybody, to be like away. Sometimes by accident, you try to hug or shake the hands. So that didn't have to stop. And then putting the plastic or the little barricade, like on the peak. I always were using a glove and a mask. No matter what, how far, wherever I be, I have my employees to use the mask and use the glove. I know how many bodegas owners, they get sick, how many employees, they get sick. So because I went out and I distributed over 100,000 masks to the different stores. Some bodegueros, they die. Another one, they get serious ills that they are still sick. They still cannot breathe well because that was tough. And then they all people with bodegas, So that was something that touched me real down, and I was like, whatever I have to do, I risk myself, but I have the prevention, because I have my mother, I have my kids as well. So it's like I said, God says, save that I will save you, but you got to do your part. Papers, toilet paper, Bounty, sanitizer, all of the detergents, Clorox. The Clorox always been cheap until the pandemic. Now the Clorox is expensive. The Clorox that I used to sell for $1.99, now I have to sell it for $7.99 or $6.99. On some type of products, the bodega, we didn't raise the price. We was selling as we were getting it, how we was getting it. If they raise the price, we raise a little bit as usually. Some other store, they did it crazy, but the bodega, since we know our customer, we know the situation that everybody was going through. So we cannot increase, and we didn't increase the price much as we get it, or the company raising us. And what they did was speculating with the price, and making it hard to get to the people so they can have a real high price. So that was no good from the company. The company, they abused, but we didn't. We kept the price as usually with the same margin or percentage that we sell it. They got to know that, and this part, even that we make profits, it's a profitable business, but we have to love to service. We have to service our community. We make profit, but we have to be careful about, we have to care about our neighbors. They are the people who help us to succeed. Bodeguero work normally is more than 14 hours a day. And on tough time, we have to do it more because sometimes we are not making enough money. So the owner have to work straight from the morning close. They have to make the 2 shifts, open and close. There's a Small Business Just Survival Act. If we get that approved, that will be a whole change. That will be the guarantee for us, for bodegas, that we are very essential. Our leaders should understand that situation and guarantee that when our lease expires, we still can have the lease, that the landlord have to renew the lease without taking money under the table. And we need that so we can stay in this New York City. We can be part of our community and be a symbol of New York. And we will survive, we will succeed. New York is a great city, and New York have a greatest people in the world. We are a very tough people that we never give up. We're gonna be great.
So thanks remotely to Francisco for sharing those words. And I think that's a really great segue to our last speaker, who is going to really bring it all together, cap it all off, and share a little bit about what she's been doing during the pandemic to assist her constituency, New Yorkers, and everyone across the food system. I'm very excited to introduce my state senator, Senator Jessica Ramos, who represents New York's 13th district in the state Senate. It includes the Queens neighborhoods of Corona, East Elmhurst, Jackson Heights, and parts of Astoria, Elmhurst, and Woodside. Senator Ramos chairs the Senate Committee on Labor, where she's passed historic legislation to grant farm workers basic rights, raise wages for car wash workers, create a registry of workplace fatalities, and protect immigrants from retaliatory employers, among others. Senator Ramos has also passed legislation to legalize e-bikes and e-scooters, and is currently fighting for a billionaire's tax that will fund economic relief for excluded workers and beyond. Senator Ramos, welcome.
Hey, Neil, how are you guys? It's so good to see everybody. And I just kind of want to take a little bit of Francisco Marte's energy. I love what he said about how proud he is of being a New Yorker. I am too. I think we're the best people in the world. And that's why I'm so honored to represent my neighbors in the New York State Senate. Thank you so much for having me today. I have to say that I'm just so impressed with the conversation. This is likely the most comprehensive conversation, at least that I've ever been a part of, when it comes to our food system. And it's been a great experience trying to figure out how to tie so many loose ends, how to figure out how we can help people along the food supply chain, and really, figuring out the issue from soup to nuts. The neighborhoods that I represent in Queens are famously the most diverse neighborhoods in the country, if not the world. We speak more than 160 languages. Some people even say 200 languages in our corner of Queens. It's the first place where so many immigrants land, and it becomes sort of like a stepping stone for so many of our immigrants, just like my parents. My parents arrived to Jackson Heights from Colombia 40 years ago. And growing up in Queens, of course, makes you a foodie, I think, inherently. We love good food, and really it's been quite an experience just trying to figure out how, as a legislator, I can help everyone along the food chain. And I take that responsibility, of course, very seriously because I am chair of the Labor Committee. And I really wanted to prioritize from the get the Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act. That bill had been languishing in the state Senate for decades, I think 3 decades. Many people on both sides of the aisle had carried the bill. And I really wanted to make sure that I was the last state senator to carry the bill. And that's what I had told the workers at Rural Migrant Ministry. I actually love that you played a video from Dolores Bustamante. I had the privilege of meeting Dolores on the farm where she works, where she picks apples with her coworkers, and got to see firsthand what their working conditions were like. And of course, like every industry, it's never the bad actors that are going to allow you to see the working conditions. But nevertheless, it was really important for me to show that even though I'm a city girl, I'm from Queens, right? And I really wanted to stress the point that I was going to visit as many corners of New York State as I could, and really get a feel for what the agricultural industry is going through. And of course, this is pre-pandemic. We're talking about the 2019 legislative session. And it was really interesting. I got to see dairy farms. I got to see apple farms. I saw onion farms. I saw a bee farm. And really, it's the 5th largest industry in the state of New York. And of course, it's important because it keeps us all fed. Next to housing, of course, it being one of the most necessary things in our lives. But in my district, because we have that diversity, we, of course, depend so much on the food industry. We have so many restaurants, and I wanted to make sure that we were going back to the source of all of this food, which are the farms. And we visited the farms. We had 3 legislative hearings across the state, which had never been done on the bill before. We had one out east in Long Island in Suffolk County, and 2 upstate, where we had so many farmers and farm workers testify for and against the bill. And I'll tell you why this is important later. But it was really interesting to hear some of the working conditions at some farms, unfortunately. And we were lucky to get these co-sponsors that we needed in order to pass the bill. And it granted farm workers overtime pay. It granted workers a day off. It granted workers the right to collectively bargain, all for the first time, because farm workers had been excluded from labor laws that were set decades and decades ago. It was actually the last Jim Crow era law that was on the books in New York, and it needed to be fixed. So I'm very happy to say that my colleagues were supportive and helped us pass the bill so that we can correct this injustice. And lo and behold, they've been able to, depend on unemployment benefits for the first time during the pandemic. It ended up being crucial that we passed this bill in 2019. We wouldn't have, who would have thunk it? But it really did help a lot of families, I'm proud to say. And it ended up being a very important way for me to start building relationships with many of the farms upstate. When the pandemic hit, our district was the epicenter of the epicenter. We lost about 1,500 of our neighbors to the coronavirus, most of them breadwinners. And it quickly became apparent that, especially for our large undocumented population, it would be difficult for them to get any relief. And so the first thing that I wanted to do was figure out how we can help people get fed, hopefully helping them save a little money towards rent. And because times were quickly becoming very difficult. And we ended up calling the very same farms that testified against our bill. I had seen in the news one morning, just what you guys were talking about a little earlier, so many of our farms having to dump their product, whether it was milk, whether it was, apples and cabbage and onions. And so I called Torrey Farms, Maureen Torrey. I called the Farm Bureau. I called the Rick at the vegetable growers. And I asked, I was like, hey, it was really good to work with you. By the way, I had always told them and Rural Migrant Ministry that the idea was to come to an agreement, and hopefully we would all walk away equally unhappy with the final product of the bill. But we established a good relationship, and they were so willing to help. And I'm just so thankful to those farms, because they helped us feed thousands of families in Queens over the course of months. We were feeding approximately 2,000 families at the peak of our program over the summer. And it was approximately 30,000 pounds every week of food, of fruit, of vegetables, of milk. Sometimes they even sent us cheese and meats, if you'll believe it. And we're so thankful to those farms for doing that. The reality is that there is no coherent food system in New York. I feel that even though it's such a necessary part of our lives, somehow we don't talk about it as seriously as we do housing. We need to talk about food because there needs to be a better system, especially in considering climate change and the environment. The job of the farmer is getting harder every day. And in New York, it's very hard for our farmers sometimes to compete with places like New Jersey or even Canada when it comes to apples specifically. And so we want, of course, for everybody to do better. A lot of the farmers felt that, we wanted to increase wages and the quality of life, improve the quality of life for the farm workers, but we have to take the farmers into consideration as well. Actually, the current occupant of the White House, who will soon be evicted, or has been evicted, right, has actually not been great for farmers, especially small farmers. And here in New York, we can do more to help them with so much overhead. Here, farms, of course, provide housing for many farm workers. There are approximately 100,000 farm workers in New York State. Most of them are actual New York workers, only about 10% of them, I learned with my work with the bill, actually come to New York from overseas. Well, actually not overseas technically. They come from Mexico or Guatemala or Jamaica or Haiti to come help. And so it's been really a pleasure to be able to do this work and figure it out with so many of you. But the reality is that people are still hungry in my district. It's been really hard. The food lines have only gotten longer. We had to end our food program because as restaurants started reopening, farms were able to sell their product again. That was why we had worked with these farms to get the product down to Queens, but we still have a lot of work to do. And I know that the folks in the city of New York, at City Hall, have been working very hard as well. I'm very thankful to them and to all of you guys. But there needs to be better coordination from farm to table here in New York. There's no reason why our kids in public schools, for example, shouldn't be eating more food that is produced in New York State. We need to reduce our carbon footprint, and that means making better choices about how it is that we're sourcing our food and where we're sourcing our food from. We need to protect our farms. Protecting our farms is protecting our planet, and it's protecting our food. Right now we're really hurting in the district with so many restaurants closing. We actually new data came out today from the Hospitality Alliance is saying that we've lost 294,000 jobs here in New York City, and people still need to eat. So, I mean, that's why I'm advocating, of course, for a billionaire's tax to help all of these folks who have been excluded from benefits, right? Street vendors. I actually just finished marching with them across the Brooklyn Bridge. They have had a very difficult time as well. They don't qualify for unemployment. They didn't get a stimulus check. And we need Mayor de Blasio to increase the number of permits that the city allows them. They haven't increased the number of permits in New York City since Koch was the mayor. And that's been it's been over 30 years. And so the entire system, and I keep saying this throughout, the entire system needs to be updated, needs to be improved upon. We need to get food to people easier, hopefully in a much more environmentally friendly way. Thank you for the conversation, because I really, love being able to have these conversations and work with you guys, hopefully to figure out how we can improve the system, keep people's bellies full, and hopefully all while making sure every single person is paid a living wage and is treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve. I think you guys are going to ask some questions, so I'll stop there, and I'm happy to keep the discussion going. Oh, I'm sorry. I see a comment here about urban farming. One thing I forgot to mention is that as a result, and this is actually before the pandemic, as a result of our relationship with the Farm Bureau, they've actually now come down to the district to visit, and we are working with PS14 in Corona to hopefully be able to build a farm at the school so that the students are able to learn how to grow their own food. I am a firm believer that it is a life skill. Everybody should know how to grow food if they really need to. And I'm very proud of that project, that long-term project. But it's about also instilling some pride in the kids who come, whose parents or themselves come from countries that did a lot of farm work. My grandfather was a coffee farmer. This is how I honor his legacy.
Thank you so much, Senator, and Richard and Ross, and all of you for being with us today. Do we have a couple minutes for questions, or do we need to wrap up, Emily? I think a lot of the questions have been.
Could I just interject? I just want to share something
Please.
Driscoll Foods actually partners with Torrey Farms, Senator
Oh,
Ramos.
that's great. I'm so happy to hear that. Maureen is fantastic.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that when you're going through your
Do my
session.
rant?
But I just want, but I just want to make sure that that was that's an important piece of information that we do, which we're very proud of. So when you said that, I was like beaming.
Yeah, no, Maureen's been fantastic, and of course we started very far apart. You know, they were very upset when I had reintroduced the bill and saw that I was very serious about getting it done. But it was such a great experience because I didn't know that the farms and the farm workers had actually never come to the table to talk about the bill and figure out a compromise. That was a really great experience, and I'm just glad it got done.
And your energy.
Wonderful. So it is 2:32, so this session is over. I want to remind folks that at 2:45, join us back in the auditorium where we're going to have some closing remarks for to wrap up today. Thank you so much for this lovely panel.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Senator Ramos, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful questions as well. Bye.